What up, y'all? It's your boy Jay Connor of the Extraordinary Negroes.
This is Tatiana from Talking Off the Couch podcast.
Hey, this is Drea from Getting Lifted with Urban Lotus.
This is Rodney Boyd from On My Grown, the podcast.
This is Dawn Fraser from the Barbershop Stories podcast.
This is Matt Marr from the Dear Maddie Show.
This is Josh Elledge from UpEndPR.com.
This is Andrea Gage from the Boundary Spectrum.
Hey, y'all. Hey, I am that veggie girl. My show is Let's Veg About It, and you are listening to the Billionaire Lifestyle Podcast.
Welcome to the Billionaire Lifestyle Podcast with your host, Emmett Muckles. Please visit iTunes, Stitcher, or emmettmuckles.com to listen to all the episodes for free.
Hey, ladies and gentlemen, this is Emmett with the Billionaire Lifestyle Podcast. You know, one day I'm going to get this intro right and just stop introducing myself, but that's fine. You guys know who I am. You can always find the podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, TuneIn Radio, Google Play, and even Spotify. So you can get it right to your phone, car, radio, whatever device you have. But today my guest is Valerie Mrak. I can't even begin to tell you about this woman because she's so inspiring. She's so full of love. She's so full of passion, and she has stories. And I've met her at my Toastmasters group and quickly found out how involved this woman is. You know, she's involved in the arts, she's involved in humanity, and she's involved in love, for one thing. So I want to introduce and say hello to Valerie. How you doing?
Good morning, Emmett.
So, as I always try to start with, let's go back to your beginning and let's try to paint a picture of what brought you to now. So, you know, we're in Northwest Indiana, and Northwest Indiana is, I would like to say, not one of the most progressive and forward places for spirituality, for, you know, it's kind of like the Bible Belt of the North is what I call it. But you're a flower that stands out of this minutia here that I see sometimes. So what brought you to that?
That is a big question.
I know, I'm so bad with it, but it kind of formulates to start wrapping your mind around where we're going to go.
Oh, my goodness. Well, I was born and raised in Northwest Indiana in Portage, which basically was a big cornfield with a few houses at the time. And I literally watched Portage grow up around me. As I grew up, Portage grew up.
Right.
From a sort of loose-knit 3 farming communities into a town by the time I was in high school, into a city by the time I was in college, brought on by, to some extent, white flight from Gary, Indiana.
Really?
Yes. And to some extent because the land was cheap and people could afford to live there. And to some extent because their Bethlehem Steel and Midwest Steel established themselves in Portage and provided lots and lots of jobs. So lots of people from Kentucky and Tennessee moved up.
So this is like
Indy-Tucky. It's what, I'm sorry?
Indy-Tucky. So
in a way.
So
in a
we're,
way.
Well, that's what we said when I'm from Detroit, and you know there were these communities, outlying communities, and a lot of people came up from the South, including my parents, and that's kind of like the moniker that tells you how the land got settled to where it populated today. But you are a filmmaker, you're a writer, you're a storyteller, and that encompasses a lot of items. You don't see these people. You know, these people generally go to the larger cities, or they go to where they can find more opportunity for their works. So how did you come to being a filmmaker?
Well, I originally wanted to be a writer. No, I wanted to be a writer.
You have to see the pose she did.
like Joe March in The Attic in Little Women, you know, I the romance of writer. And then I went to college to enter a writing program and realized that Writing is a lonely art.
Yes, it is.
Yes, and it was the 70s, early 70s, and the feminist movement was going on. I went to Indiana University in Bloomington, but there's so much to how I became a filmmaker. As I grew up I grew up one of 5 kids, and I was a second child. I was the second daughter, and so all that came behind me were boys.
Oh, wow.
And I just feel like I didn't have a voice in my family. I didn't feel like I had much of a voice anywhere. So I get to college, and I'm looking at how I can have a voice. The feminist movement is going on, feminist studies, all that kind of thing. And I was struggling. I was actually struggling as a freshman, and I dropped out of school for a while.
Okay.
I was disowned by my parents for a while. I learned how to be a survivor.
Were you a hippie?
Yes, I was as hippie as Indiana would possibly allow. The first thing that I went to do when I was, went to my dorm and left my dorm, that very first, my parents dropped me off. I left my stuff in my dorm room, and then I went to go find myself other hippies. And I found this. I was sitting in the Commons at Indiana University, and there was this guy with this great big beard who was throwing a frisbee for his dog named Toke. And thus started my college career.
Right? You said Toke.
Yes.
But during that college time, so that was had to be a very different experience for you coming out of small town America, and now you're ingrained in the population. Like you said, you were in a family that had a number of siblings around you. So, when you have those families, the fight for a voice can be very real and sometimes not manifest. When you got to that school and you started making new friends, did that cause you to blossom, or did that promote your blossoming into who you are today?
Well, I think it really started back when I was much smaller. It wasn't in college, actually. I didn't have a particular interest in film per se.
Yeah.
As a youth, what I did, my mom told me once that she didn't know what to do with my imagination, that my imagination was different than the other kids.
Right.
And she didn't know what to do with it. And I grew up in the Indiana Dunes. The Indiana Dunes is a very, very unique area.
Yeah, it is.
No, well, it's ecologically unique. As a matter of fact, the study of ecology was born here.
Really?
Yes. It's the eastern, western, northern, and southern migration endpoints for a number of plants and animals. And there was a biology professor on the South Shore, train, going to lecture at the University of Chicago, and he noticed that there were some plants that were not indigenous to this area, different kinds of plants not indigenous to this area. He got off the train to explore that, and it was Arctic bearberry growing in and among prickly pear cactus. So something from Alaska growing amongst something from Arizona. And that's actually where the study of ecology was born.
Wait a minute, what year was this?
Oh gosh, it was in either the very late 1890s or the early 1900s.
Oh wow.
Very early 1900s.
So you went way back.
Well, I wasn't alive then. But so this area is very unique, and you jokingly call it Indie-Tucky, but there's also been, and there still is, a lot of very unique, sort of shamanistic, individualistic people living here. And one of them that caught my imagination as a kid was somebody that was named Diana of the Dunes. Now, you're going to have to explain that. You're going to get a lot of stories here.
That's fine. That's why I really wanted to sit down and talk with you, because just the content that you have to present to the human beings in a very structured format, I could only imagine what you have just sitting down in conversation, let alone understanding what you've been through, because I really, there's an energy about you that I wanted to extract and share with the world. So that's why I'm like, go ahead, just read.
Okay. Well, Diana's real name was Alice Mabel Gray.
Uh-huh.
And her father was a doctor, medical doctor in Chicago.
Okay.
She was wicked smart. She graduated summa cum laude, math major, from the University of Chicago when she was 16 years old.
Whoa.
Yes.
Uber smart.
Yes, uber smart. And then she went on to the university, and pardon me if I don't pronounce this right, Göttingen in Germany.
Göttingen?
Okay. She went there for a couple of years, and something that was going on at the same time that she went to the university was a upper middle class kids were leaving home in droves and joining these walking communes.
Huh. This is in Germany.
In Germany,
Okay.
yes. And this is my pet theory. I think she was affected by those walking communes. Because when she came back to the U.S., she went to go to get her doctorate degree in Göttingen. And she came back to the United States. She couldn't find a job. She finally got a job, I think, with the Coast Guard doing an astronomical things that I just don't know about to help ships navigate, things like that. Then she came back to Chicago after a stint on the East Coast, and she just couldn't find any purchase in Chicago as a young woman who was wicked smart.
What year was this? Or what era or decades?
That was in the late 1890s.
Oh, yeah.
Early 1900s, okay. She worked for a while with an astronomy magazine affiliated with the University of Chicago. And then there was also a hiking club in Chicago called the Prairie Club. It was sort of an upper class, because she was part of the upper classes, right?
Right.
Because her dad was a doctor. An upper class walking group from Chicago that would often come out to the dunes. And one day she joined them and never came back.
Wait. This is not something bad, is it?
No.
No.
No, she actually found an old boxcar and she started living in the boxcar.
So she's got one of the first tiny houses, basically.
Yeah. And she was kind of crazy. For who knows? I mean, today she might have been called bipolar or whatnot. I don't know. But she just wandered around, wanted to be left alone, quoted poetry. And some newspaper reporter heard about her and came out, kind of camped out and followed her. She gave one interview to this reporter, and he was the one that dubbed her the Diana of the Dunes.
So where was this that she kind of made her stake?
Right around where I lived. In the Ogden Dunes area. Yeah, which is right north of, it's part of Portage.
So this is probably right before all the industry were really taking hold.
Oh gosh, yes. It was yes. Gary had been established, but it was not the Gary steel mills it came in like 1908, I think. So was the early 1900s. And so my stomping grounds were her stomping grounds. I used to pretend I was her.
So you assume you assumed her energy, or you identified with her energy to be free.
Yeah, a little bit. At least the romantic part of it. Her story was actually really tragic.
Ew.
Because she wasn't accepted by the people around her at all, and she was kind of crazy.
Yeah, well, that was before women's, the culmination of the 1920s, women's suffrage. So there was a whole different ideology that was happening. And guys, you'll have to excuse me because there's a lot of, we're in a restaurant.
Right.
And I did that on purpose so that we could have some ambience. But you're going to hear some stuff in the background just to let you know. But
well, there were a lot of crazy characters that lived around here. There was one guy called Medicine Joe, who was not a medicine man at all. He was although he sold this cream that was this brilliant healing cream, and it would heal burns, and it would heal scrapes, and it would heal your horse, and it would heal your sore back, and it would heal everything.
So he was a tonic salesman.
He was a tonic salesman until they found out that he was just buying great big huge buckets of Burma Shave and putting it in smaller containers.
Wait a minute, what's Burma Shave?
And selling Burma Shave as this salve. It's a shaving cream.
That's a hustle.
Yes.
That's a good hustle.
So there were a lot of just, crazy sort of huckster personalities living in the dunes, which was not a very subtle place.
But it really has like this very earthy vibe to it, because you have dunes that are away from the water, and then you have the big lake that's there, and you have a lot of wildlife. You have wetlands that are inland a little bit, marshes. Mm-hmm. There's a lot of ecology that is working around this area.
Yes.
So I understand absolutely all of that, and now I'm starting to get a picture of how you could blossom in this very Rust Belt area. And I have to apologize. I didn't mean any bad connotations when I said like Indie-tucky, or because it's just a social term that we use
it's
in the
one
Midwest.
Aspect.
Yeah, that we use to identify where people migrated from. But so as you came along in this area, and you started to see that you do have a place where you grew up, where you might not have thought you had one when you were younger, how did you move to being in touch with what you feel and making that a part of your life? So the writing, the movies, the outreach program, and the travel. We haven't even gotten to the travel yet. So and let me take it back so I can give people context. Because one of the big things was this movie that you had produced, and there was a story about it, about a very good deed that you did when you traveled to Asia, which is particularly India, correct?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So can you tell me a little bit about that?
Yes, I was co-producing a film called Shadow Over Tibet, a documentary about, originally, the first Tibetans that came to Chicago as a community to settle.
Yeah.
And it's a very long story. We had the opportunity, we thought, to interview His Holiness the Dalai Lama because he was coming to Chicago.
Okay.
And that didn't quite work out. So we literally chased His Holiness across the United States with our proposal.
Right.
And very shortly before he left the country, his personal secretary called and said, His Holiness loves your proposal. He asks you to please come to India for the interview. And so we're like, oh no, can we do this? Can we not do this? How do we do this? A million questions. We're documentary filmmakers. We don't have enough money to get across the country, let alone get to another country.
Yeah.
But I eventually said, when a holy man knocks, do not answer the door. We have to do this. We have to figure out how to make this happen. So the short story is we made it happen. We were in Dharamshala, where the Dalai Lama and the Tibetan government in exile is situated, which is in the foothills of the Himalayas. And we were looking for stories to add to our initial story of how these Tibetans had come to Chicago and to the U.S. and how they were faring and how they were maintaining their culture in exile around the world.
Because it's very different once you land on American soil.
Oh.
If you're from somewhere else, and just the same way, too, when you go somewhere else, you're like, whoa, this is different.
Yes.
But continue on, I'm sorry.
So as we were looking for people to interview to enrich the story, we heard about this one monk, Palden Gyatso, who had recently left Tibet to come to India. He had been a political prisoner, Chinese political prisoner, for nearly 35 years.
Wow.
And he had finally been let go. He had been horribly tortured. And not treated well, and he was now out. Somehow he managed to bring instruments of torture like the ones that political prisoners
have to endure.
Yeah, and with him. And he was very frail. He was very ill, and he had this mission. And I thought he wasn't going to make it. He was that ill.
Wow.
And every time a firecracker would go off, it was Losar, Tibetan New Year, and there were firecrackers all over the place. I thought he was going to faint. I was very, very afraid for him.
Uh-huh.
And when I left India on that trip, and we were literally there on a shoestring, we begged, borrowed, and begged some more to be able to get together what we needed to get together to make that trip. And I gave him what I thought I could scrape together from my travel budget, which was a whopping $25 American dollars. And there's much more to the story than what you heard.
Yeah.
Yes.
I believe it.
So I gave him $25, and I was the one that did the first interview with him, which convinced us as a crew that we were going to film him, which we did. And, then I came back to the U.S. and went along my way and didn't hear anything more.
Okay.
And then I heard that there was this march from Washington, D.C. to the UN in New York to raise awareness about the relationship of Tibetans in exile to the Chinese and the people still in Tibet. And one of them was a Lama named Palden Gyatso. And I thought, well, it can't be my Palden Gyatso. Cannot be that one, because he would never be able to walk from Washington, D.C.
So what's the time difference between when you met and when you heard about this march?
It was probably at least a couple years.
5, 10?
Not that many.
Okay.
No.
So it was a short period of time.
Yes.
Okay.
So it couldn't be this. I mean, that would shock me. And then I got this strange phone call. The phone call was a young Tibetan man speaking English saying, Palden Gyatso would like to talk to you. And he wants to thank you for the $25. And all I was thinking is, because, a lot of Tibetan organizations would call me and ask for me to donate to whatever cause, that this was just a call for some money. And and right then, I mean, as a documentary filmmaker, there are those feast times and then there's famine times.
Yeah.
It goes famine, famine, feast, famine, 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 feast, famine, like that.
It's called life.
Yes. And I was definitely in one of those droughts, and I had been actually severely depressed. And so I ignored it. And then about a week later, I got another call. Palden Gyatso would like to talk to you, and he wants to thank you for the $25. I'm going, oh my goodness. And so I'm calling the Tibetans I know in Chicago saying, do you know about this Palden Gyatso? And by the way, Lamas give Tibetan babies their names. Uh-huh. So there are about 12 Tibetan names. So there could be 300 Palden Gyatsos, right? Yeah. So, and one Tibetan that I talked to said, no, it's the monk. It's the monk, Palden Gyatso. And I'm like, yeah, they want $25 from me, and I feel really bad. I can't give them the $25. And...
Oh, you thought they wanted $25?
Yes, I thought they wanted a donation of $25. And that was like, $1,000 to me at the time. But eventually I thought, they're going to keep calling me, and I'm just going to have to call them back and tell them I can't give them $25 at this time.
So you hadn't really talked to them. You were just getting messages.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. So I called the number that they gave me and talked to this person I could barely understand. And they said, oh, okay, good. This is Valerie. I'll bring Palden Gyatso on the phone, and I'm going to be on the extension because Palden Gyatso doesn't speak any English.
Okay.
And so I said, okay. And Palden Gyatso said, he came on the phone and he said, I want to thank you for the $25. Well, you know what? I had forgotten that I had given him $25. I had forgotten. And I still didn't know. And I said, I don't know what you're talking, what are you talking about? And then I thought, it's just their way of saying, give us $25.
Oh, gotcha.
No. I'm still thinking this is a donation request.
You're in American mode.
Exactly. And he said, I have your picture and I pray for you every night. And I know you've been ill.
Oh.
And I hope you're feeling better. And I'm just like, there's chills, and there's like, what the heck? Like, what the heck? What the heck? And I hang up, still completely freaked out, and call my friend Norbu Sampel. He still lives in Chicago, and he was the main character of our documentary. And I said, Norbu, have you been talking to Paul Gyatso? No, I haven't been. He said, Valerie, just accept it. Just accept it. And by the way, do you remember that we took Polaroids? Because that was one thing that we do. Whoever we talked to, we took Polaroids of as a part of our production profile.
Yeah.
And I had forgotten that Paul Gyatso had asked us to take Polaroids of ourselves, Norbu and me, because Norbu was with me as the translator in India. And so, yes, Paul Gyatso had pictures of us. And I said, well, what about the sick part? And he said, just accept it. He knows he's a monk. So I said, okay. But I still didn't remember the $25, and Norbu didn't know about it. And so I said, okay, well, he thinks I sent him $25, so I think I have to send him $25. I don't know how I'm going to be able to afford it. So I sent them $25.
Again.
Yes, again. And then I had asked Paul Gyatso if he was coming to Chicago on this trip to America, just still not believing that he was like hale and hearty enough to walk from Washington, D.C. to the UN in New York. And he said no. And then the plans got changed. And the Tibetan community in Chicago brought him. And they called me up and they said, Paul Gyatso wants to meet you.
Okay.
And when he met me, he took my hands and he's like, thank you to my first American sponsor. And I'm like, oh, no. He thinks I'm going to sponsor him? What does that mean? Does that mean, like, I'm going to have to... What does that mean? I didn't know what that meant, being a sponsor, right? I didn't know what that meant. And... it didn't... I thought, does he want to move to the U.S.? Am I now going to be responsible for him? Like, I've got another mouth to feed, and I've got this, and I've got that. I was like, what?
So how did it conclude? I mean...
Oh, God, there's so much...
A culmination of understanding what was really happening versus what you thought was happening.
I still didn't have a clue. But I want to tell you a funny story about Paul Gyatso. So here's this old man who had he'd been tortured. He'd been shackled with just like a single chain link between his ankles. So he walked shuffled like little shuffles, and he had his hands locked behind his back.
Oh.
The only way he could eat is if people shoved his food bowl toward him, and he literally ate like a dog.
Oh, that's...
it was horrible, and he was like that for years. And then he has an autobiography. It's called The Autobiography of a Tibetan Monk that tells the story. And I recommend people get that book, because you'd get a real idea of what things were like. And so he had to learn to walk again when he got the shackles off, and that just makes it and he walked from Washington, D.C. to the UN. And I had recently had surgery on both knees. And I was hobbling around, feeling sorry for myself. And at one point, Paulden and I were left alone. Okay. And we were at the John Hancock Center. And he had been watching me sort of hobble around all by, and realized he couldn't talk any English. I didn't speak anything but thank you and hello in Tibetan. And there's stairs that go down. There's a big fountain at the John Hancock Plaza in Chicago, and stairs that go down. He picks up his monk's robe and runs down a few steps and kind of looks at me with a twinkle in my eye like he wants to race. And I'm going, really?
He is a Tibetan monk, though.
He's like 100 years old.
They can do anything. They're magical.
And I'm like, all right, I'm on. So I raced him down the steps. He taught me that I was going to be okay. And he knew that he was doing that. And he beat me.
So
anyway, so he's giving me all these gifts, and it wasn't until he left that I remembered that I had given him $25 in India.
It took you all that time.
Took me all that time. So then the second time I went to India, also to interview the Dalai Lama on another project, I wanted to find Palden Gyatso. I wanted to see how he was doing and all these other things. And when I found him, that's when I learned that he had written his book. I didn't know that until then.
So the story that you shared with us previously was kind of the conclusion, but there was a precursor to that.
Yes.
I was sitting there a little confused. I'm like, wait a minute, this doesn't sound like...
No, there's
layers.
Yes, layers and layers. And so I found him in this cozy little dry apartment, immune from the monsoon going on. And he told me that I was his first sponsor, and as his first sponsor, I was the one responsible for his being able to tell his story, which was then responsible for his getting speaking engagements around the world. He used to travel around the world with his torture instruments.
Wow.
And then tell people what it was like to be a political prisoner in Tibet and work to raise money to help other Tibetans in Tibet.
So what... Can I ask you, and I'm not very familiar with it, what was the reason for the torture between the Tibetans and the Chinese government?
Well, it started in the late 40s, early 50s. What we say in our film, which we'll have to have a viewing at some point, is that China wanted the territory, the Tibetan territory, because it was mineral rich, because it was resource rich, and they wanted the territory to move an overpopulated China, people from an overpopulated China. And they kind of took a book from what the white Europeans did to the indigenous in America, really. They marginalized the Tibetans, they took their language away from them, and they occupied China. And they occupied Tibet. I'm sorry, not occupied China. They occupied Tibet. And so the Dalai Lama escaped with his life in 1949, I believe, and came to India. And India gave him, Jawaharlal Nehru welcomed him and other Tibetans.
So he gave him refuge.
Yes, and that's where he was allowed to set up his government in exile. And then many thousands of Tibetans followed him, and literally they ran at night over the Himalayas and hid during the day because the Chinese were looking for them.
Can you imagine? Area.
Yes, can you imagine just walking from here to the Illinois state line? No.
And it's like walking in Denver because it's high elevated too.
The highest mountain range in the world. But they did it.
So, what made you want to do a documentary? What got you into the vein of saying, I'm going to make a documentary?
Well, the Shadow Over Tibet was not my baby. My co-producer and the director of the film, Rachel Lyon, asked me if I would produce with her. And originally it was going to be her master's thesis project. She was getting her master's in film, and it was going to be a 30-minute film. It was going to be about Tibetans coming to Chicago. And then we got the promise of the interview with His Holiness and thought, oh my goodness, well, this is going to blow this out to a much more important documentary with a message that Americans need to hear. And so that's how I got involved with it. And at first it was going to be a project that was going to last 6 weeks. Well, it lasted 2.5 years.
Were you involved with the fundraising for the project too?
Oh, yes. Oh my goodness, yes.
Because you were telling me about this scenario of raising money for projects like, and when was this originally shot? Or when was this project started?
In 1992.
Oh, yeah.
And we finished sometime in 94. It was very interesting raising money. There were a lot of people that didn't know who the Tibetans were, who didn't know who the Dalai Lama was. We were seeking grants. We were seeking personal donations. We were seeking money any which way we could, and I was responsible for many of the grants, and I literally had the phone slammed down saying, "We don't give money to cults."
That's such an American thing, though, because we don't understand things that are outside the United States very much.
Right, and for people who don't know right now who the Dalai Lama is, because there's a lot of younger people now that don't know what Tibetan Buddhism actually is, which is kind of surprising to me, but I've been so steeped in it. The Buddhism is one of the major 4 religions in the world, and the Dalai Lama is the spiritual head of Buddhism, Tibetan Buddhism.
So he's kind of like the Pope.
Kind of, and at the time that we were talking to him, he was not only the spiritual head of the Tibetan people, he was also the government head. He has since relinquished that so that there's a parliament of Tibetans, so he is that no more. And he instituted that. It wasn't the Tibetan people. He instituted that the power of the government would not be in the same person as the spiritual. He's such a forward-thinking.
So basically separation of church and state.
Absolutely.
And with all these things that you've done, I wanted to touch a little bit on, you as a filmmaker, you as a writer. So let's come to today. What is your mission today?
What is my mission today? That's interesting. Just to backtrack a tiny bit, there was a second film I was looking at called Journey to Peace. The Dalai Lama said something in the interview during Shadow Over Tibet that mightily struck me. We had asked him what he meant by wanting Tibet set aside as a zone of peace, even if he never saw Tibet again in his lifetime. He said that during his Nobel Peace Prize acceptance speech. And we asked him what that meant. And we're Westerners, so we think it's something kind of bureaucratic, like a UN specifically for the East or, what have you. And instead he said, well, it would be a place of peace toward the animals, a place of peace toward the environment, a place of peace toward fellow man. But of course, that's all external peace. Before you can have external peace, you must have a zone of peace in your heart. And that was like hitting me, like boing, in the like a cartoon character. It's like, what is that? What does the zone of peace in your heart mean? Because at the time, I was very angry in my life.
Why were you angry?
I was just mad. I was mad at my husband. I was out the door on my marriage. It wasn't working as far as I was concerned. I thought there was a colleague that was cheating me. I thought, just like there was a neighbor that had pissed me off. It's just like there was nothing working. And I was smart enough to see that I was the common denominator to all those things.
That was one of the things that you said during our conversation about these things in your life. And you had to step back and look and said, why are all these things happening? Well, this is very important because a lot of times people don't do this, which is stop looking at the outside world and see what you're contributing to your own situation. So I'm sorry, but continue on. I just thought that was really important.
No, that's great. So I started on my own journey to find out what a zone of peace in my heart might mean for me and what other people knew about it. So I started asking people what peace meant to them. And they didn't have a real answer. They'd like, their eyes would go up in their head and they'd think about it in a minute and they'd say, well, it's not when we're not at war. Or they'd say, it's when my kids aren't fighting. Or they'd say, it's how I feel when I watch the sunset. It's like conditions, right?
Yeah.
Conditions. And I thought, okay, that's interesting. Then I started asking people, well, who's your favorite role model for peace? Because I thought that was interesting. Who are our role models? And every single person said, not every single person, there were a couple of exceptions. Most people said Mahatma Gandhi.
Okay.
Martin Luther King.
I knew that was coming.
Yes, or Mother Teresa.
Yep.
And I thought, oh, that's interesting. They're all dead. And then I would ask, I'd follow up and I'd say, well, what is it about what they said and how they lived that spoke to you? And again, their eyes would go up in their head and they'd go, they'd say, well, Mahatma Gandhi took India to independence in a peaceful way, which wasn't really that peaceful. Lots of people got hurt, Or Martin Luther King led the nonviolent movement for civil rights, or Mother Teresa, helps poor people or something. But they didn't have a creed that they lived by, these people that I was asking. So then I thought, well, maybe I'm not asking the right question. Because it's always about finding the right question, right?
You're very good at that, where you go back to when you go to the outside world and you're not seeing the results that you think you should be getting, you go back internal and try to see where is it coming from and try to decipher that. That's pretty awesome.
Thank you.
A lot of people can't do that.
And I am persistent. So I asked people a slightly different question. I said, who is your favorite living role model?
Ooh. That got a whole different level of interaction, I would suspect.
Well, I got 3 basic answers. You want to know what they are?
Yes, I do.
Mahatma Gandhi, Martin Luther King, and Mother Teresa. And I'm like thinking, really? I would gently remind them that all these people are past and ask them again, do you not have any living role models? And it's like, well, no.
That's true because we've been in conflict, global conflict. I can't remember a time, and I can't think of a time where in the written history where there was no global global strife somewhere in the world. And I'm not talking about just like local stuff where this farmer and these farmers and those farmers are mad about the water. I'm talking about people losing their lives, people losing their faculties, their freedoms. I just can't think of it. And to me, that's what's attainable. That's the goal that we should have. But, part of it is the way we look at capitalism, the way we look at individualism. And I'm starting to look at individualism as a total individual in the inclusion because we are all one. And I like to look at it from the point of view of a human body. So if you have a blood cell, it's an individual blood cell, but it's part of the one. Mm-hmm. The heart muscle cell is, constricting and working with these other, it's a one piece, but it goes with the collective. And I think that's what we haven't identified as a community, as a global community. So, and this is why I wanted to talk to you, because I heard all this information benignly through your person. And I wanted to extract that because it's so deep. And the fact that you're into arts, because you had a storytelling. What was the project that you were heading in Michigan City when I first met you? You were doing a storytelling or art or something. There was something.
Yeah, so I do storytelling, which totally came from my youth days. My imagination. And, well, my dad said I learned to tell stories when I was 3, meaning I learned to lie. But actually, I think I got storytelling from my dad because he used to, we'd drive places in Indiana when, as a kid, it was much less populated than it is now. And he would make up stories about the Indians and,
and when you're a kid, that's
things.
fascinating
yes,
to you.
Yes.
It's real. You can visualize it.
Well, much of this land was really, I don't know whether you would call it swamp or bogs, but much of what is now fields of corn was covered with water.
So this is just basically an old delta, probably, or just a part of the lake that dried up. So, yeah, because I see it. I've ridden my bike about 20 miles south of the lake, and it's amazing because all of a sudden you see a sand dune.
Right.
Like, why is there a sand dune so far from any body of water? And it's probably because at one time it was either part of the lake or part of a delta that flowed south of the lake. Or
all of our major east-west highways, Highway 6, I don't know about Highway 30, but I know Highway 6 was originally a water line.
Really?
Highway 12 was a water line, Highway 20 was a water line, and now we have our original water line, yeah. So you're right, absolutely. That's why you find dunes in these unexpected places.
Yeah, it's ecologically, it's something to be marveled at. It's like you look at it and you see something, but it doesn't make sense. Like, that's not supposed to be there. And when I mean that's not supposed to be there, the civilization is really not supposed to be here because this is a very natural area. And now it explains why you have this very connection to the spirit, you have a connection to the earth, and you really want to give, including your imagination. So that just compounds everything. So, and you just competed in a Toastmasters competition.
Yes.
And you and I, we competed together,
yes,
but
did.
But not against each other. And we took the same place in both those competitions. What's your next step with speaking, or what's your next foray for 2018?
I actually teach workshops, and I do talks for entrepreneurs, business organizations, community organizations, etc., called Conflict to Possibility, insights from Nobel laureates and former gang leaders.
Okay.
And what I like to do is help people take unworkability and alienation to partnership. I forgot what it is.
So if you have two sides,
yeah,
who aren't agreeing upon or not seeing eye to eye or just not respecting each other's ideology.
Or a team not working well together, or a committee, a board of an organization not working well together.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So you bring them together so they can find that common bond so they can be productive.
Yes.
And functional.
I have principles from these Nobel Peace Prize winners and from former gang leaders, former violent offenders who have transformed their lives. And I found that these two very disparate populations of people had the same thing to say about what it takes to create peace.
Yeah, because you were telling me a story about you were involved with some Southside gangs. Mm-hmm. And, because you're a white woman in a very non-white situation, you said that it really opened your eyes because you had to go in, and it wasn't just the fact that, hey, I can come in here and do what I want. You had to go with some trepidation, and also you had to have some protection, but you also had to back up the person that you're with to say, look, I am respectable and I am not going to jeopardize your standing in order to make it better, because sometimes when you try to do good, you end up doing worse. And I just found that fascinating because every time I talk to you, something new comes up. Right. Like, you've done so many things. So with that, you're obviously speaking, you're bringing people together. I know you probably were thinking about a documentary again, but you did it in 1992.
Shadow Over Tibet, yes.
Shadow Over Tibet. And it was a very different climate then. You know, you had to raise money as a documentarian. You had to gather people together. You have to be management, creation, executor, and everything else. But today it's a very different climate because you have several items that you can raise money with, such as GoFundMe or Kickstarter. Do you have any works, or do you have anything that you probably mentor someone on who's probably making a documentary?
Well, persistence is important no matter what. That has not changed. That absolutely has not changed.
But so the answer is no.
You never give up, never give up, never give up.
And things change, and that's what's really awesome about life is that you can be in a scenario feeling so much despair, hopelessness, and one moment changes the rest of your life. All you have to do is, and this is very important that I say this, show up.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's just, and I can't express it enough. Sometimes I can't tell you how much I have gained just by showing up. I wasn't even prepared, but I showed up. And sometimes the situation will cause you to be prepared, will cause you to do your best. Mm-hmm. And, you know, that's what I see in you a lot is that you show up. And when you show up, you have the energy to show that you're ready to do the work. So that's pretty awesome.
Thank you, Emmett.
What do you, you have a meeting today. You're going to help some people and mentor some people so that they can be great speakers, so that they can be great presenters. And you said something really profound and something that I'm always promoting. And you talked about passion. You said it's so much easier to work with someone who has the passion. And I believe this too, is that you can have the talent, but you don't have the passion, and you won't be that great. You can not have the talent, but you can have the passion, and you will be immensely successful. And I want to give thanks to you for that, for one. And your next Toastmasters accolades, what's that going to be? What's your hopes?
Well,
because we just changed. I mean, Toastmasters has just changed their format. They've come into the digital age, so they have a more expansive system that you can be involved with. And they're coming along with the culture, with podcasting. They're coming along with organization and things of that nature. So how is that going to play out for you?
Well, I haven't looked at pathways yet, although I'm very excited to do so. And I'm looking at strengthening my speaking. I would love to be an accredited speaker, which is a rigorous Toastmasters program.
You've already been on, 2 TEDx's?
No, 1. I did TEDx Valparaiso University.
So you've been already on...
That's true.
And, you know, there are a lot of people who haven't even made it to that far yet. There are people who are speaking for a living who haven't even done that. So, I mean... you just make me smile. I'm just sitting there smiling. I ran out of words. But you say you want to constantly work on your craft.
I do. I love the storytelling form. I want to tell more stories. I definitely want to be a moth storyteller.
Ah, there you go.
Yes, I am going to storytelling sessions in Chicago. Chicago has storytelling sessions literally every single night of the week.
Really?
Every single day, like 365 times a year, you could find some place to tell a story or listen to a story. Yes. So I want to continue telling stories. I love doing that. As I said, I've been doing that since I was 3. Also, I really care that people know what peace is. I really care about that. That it is a created act and that it starts with me and you.
Good deal.
And what I learned sitting across from Nobel Peace Prize winners who, except for the Dalai Lama, were normal, average, everyday people. One was a secretary, one was an attorney, one was a teacher, one was a waitress that had been fired 13 times from different jobs. They were normal, everyday, regular people who lived in different parts of the world and stood up of the world that in regional conflict, and stood up and said, there's got to be something I can do for peace. They did something for peace and changed the course of the conflict. That's why they won the Nobel Peace Prize. They were people like us. I didn't want to know how heads of state did it.
Yeah.
I wanted to know how people like us did it. And I learned so many things along the way. And it's very introspective to learn that it starts with me. It starts with you. It doesn't start with somebody in the government saying there's going to be peace. You know, I'd love to see a peace department in the U.S. as part of the U.S. cabinet and stuff like that. And it still starts with the individual. If we can't do it as individuals, how do we expect our government officials to do it? Because they can't do it as individuals. They aren't doing it as individuals. I would love to teach my workshop in Congress.
Yeah. You know,
they need it.
That's one of the things, I mean, with the recent school shootings that we've witnessed in America, and I keep seeing where children and parents are going to our federal government asking to ban guns, when most people don't realize this. If you want to be most effective, start at your local area. So start with your city. Get the city to ban guns. After that, get your county to ban guns. Get your state to, because that's where we have the most power, is within our own jurisdiction with which we reside, live, work, and play. And peace is the only way we can really prosper, because we're getting to a tipping point where how many more cars can we build? How many more houses can we build? How many more mortgages can we finance of money that does not exist, you know, with our fiat currency? So I commend you on the fact, and I saw how passionate you got when you just started talking about peace, and that's what it's about. So I'm with you.
Thank you.
I'm with you.
Thank you.
And a lot of it comes down to because people don't have worth, so they don't feel they haven't found their passion. Like I said, that's the things I see you. Passion and peace, those things go together with you. And people don't feel like they're part of the community anymore.
Right.
Our tribes have been broken up. We've been told that we should have tribes, we should be individuals, but there's an individual in the tribe, like I said, with the blood cell and the heart. So I want to commend you, and I want to thank you for this interview, for being on the Billionaire Lifestyle Podcast. Now, I want to ask you one other thing. I saw a speakers bureau that you belong to in Chicago. Was that a speaker?
It's called Engaging Speakers.
Yes.
Yes. It's called Engaging Speakers, and it's actually a networking organization for speakers that also functions as a speakers bureau. Meeting planners can go on to Engaging Speakers website and find you. Okay. Through Engaging Speakers website, and then connect to your own website.
I got you. Yeah. So it's a kind of a referral,
yes,
social media for speakers that people can come to and find.
And professional development.
Very good, very good, very good. So you got your hands on a lot of stuff right now, huh?
I do, yeah.
One last thing. All right, so you're going to have to close your eyes on this one.
Okay.
So you got your eyes closed, right? So picture yourself at your home, and you're sitting on your couch. You're probably watching television. You're enjoying yourself. And all of a sudden you hear a knock at your front door. And you get up. Who in the world could that be? And you open the door, and there sits your 19-year-old self. And your 19-year-old self says, I don't have a lot of time. I have about a minute or two. To speak with you. So I'm not going to say anything, but I want to know, what do I need to know to get there happily? That's all they're asking. What do I need to know? So your answer would be?
Breathe. Know you're enough. And persistence pays off.
And ladies and gentlemen, that's Valerie Mrak on the Billionaire Lifestyle. All I have to say to you is this. Remember, when you go to the bathroom in the morning, you're going to take a shower. You're going to come out the shower, and I want you to just dry yourself off and then drop the towel on the floor. Be in your body. Nakedness all the way through. The next thing is you're going to go over to the mirror before you brush your teeth. Just take a minute. wipe the fog, smog thing off the mirror, and I want you to just take a second to look at that body. I want you to really understand what it takes for you to live on this planet. That your soul incarnated into a physical being. You are a spiritual being having a physical experience. And now I want you to get closer to the glass. Keep your eyes wide open. And then I want you to look right in the middle of your left eye, because in the middle of your left eye is a representation as above, so below, because there's a galaxy right there. The next time you come across someone else, I want you to remember what you saw in that mirror and realize that there's another galaxy in front of you when you see another person, and treat them as astral and as precious as you should treat yourself. Till next time, peace.